Greetings everyone, Brad here with Mild Manner DDC. Hope you're all doing really well out there. So today we're going to look at an interesting collaboration between Boker knives, or as they call themselves sometimes, the tree brand, or as I like to call them, Gondor.
Gondor has no king. Gondor needs no king.
And that of HEAdesigns, which is an individual, Sam, who's been designing knives for some time and does a really excellent job. And he's based out of Brooklyn, New York. Very cool aesthetic, very interesting style. His designs are always very unique and sort of identifiably his, which I certainly appreciate. So I've been a fan for some time. Now, this particular collaboration is the first that I'm aware of that he's done with sort of a named production company. So, I mean, when he gets his designs produced, he usually, you don't know what the OEM he's particularly using. So this is the first one that I think I know of that he's doing with a brand like Boker. And the knife that he's doing this with is the HEAdesigns Hunter. So this one being particularly produced by Boker, but here's the original, just so you can see. And what we have here are very similar knives, right? In fact, they're virtually identical in terms of design, which is the point, right? But it's really the materials, makeup, and cost that I think are where the differences are. But you can see they tried to be very true to the original design here. And I think that's pretty great considering I love this design. And so I was eager to pick one of these up, especially when we're talking magnitudes of 2 or 3 times the price for this than on this, because this is about a $90 to $100 knife, depending on where you pick it up. Okay, so as we talk about this Boker collaboration or Boker production version of the Hunter, we will do some specs here, then a couple of size comparisons, and then we'll get underway with our classic mild-mannered review. Sound good?
That sounds lovely.
All right, so let's talk specs here real quick. We've got blade length of 2.87 inches. We've got a blade thickness here of 0.12 inches. We've got a handle length when it's closed up, kind of from this little flare to up here, of 3.82 inches. And that gives you an overall tip to tail of 6.69 inches and a weight of 3.28 ounces. So, it's not that magical ounce and inch kind of formula that people seem to like, but it's darn close and overall is relatively easy to carry. It's pretty compact and not overly heavy considering there's a lot more stainless steel here than the titanium on the original. So anyways, there you go. Okay, how about a couple of size comparisons? Well, since we're doing these, here it is against the original HEA Hunter. As you can tell, virtually identical. So cool. All right. How about a Civivi Backlash and a Spyderco Sage 5 lightweight? So as you can see, it's very much towards the smaller size, although, it's a 2.87 inch blade, which isn't tiny, but it is sub 3 inch. But overall, it's kind of a more compact package, I think, than some other knives that you might consider smaller. And neither of those really are in that category, but there you go. Kind of gives you a sense of what we're talking about there, size-wise. All right, I think that's enough size comparisons, right? So let's get underway with our review. When we do our review, we will talk about the blade, we will talk about action, scales and hardware, and then we'll finish off with ergos and carry. So let's talk about this blade. We have got a very attractive, as I mentioned, sub 3 inch D2 steel blade. So, I'm sure some of you just went, ugh, D2. And, fair enough. I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of that, but if you're trying to drive costs down, that's one way to do it. That said, D2 is a perfectly fine steel. It may be a little prone to rusting, so you got to watch that a little bit, but by and large, it's a good steel that holds, it's a good tool steel, and it holds its edge for a pretty respectable period of time. So I'm not an anti-D2 person, but there you go. I know some people have really been turned off by it of late because it became so ubiquitous after people were screaming for something other than HCR or some of the other things. And so D2 came around, and then everybody got tired of D2. So such is the way of things, I suppose. But what we see here is a very beautiful and very kind of unique clip point style blade with this beautiful swedge. You've got the fuller there that carries over in this opening hole right there. And just a nice long curve, sort of subtle belly that comes up to that clip point there at the end. And it's just overall a really attractive blade shape. Always appealed to me on the original, and they've done a really nice job sort of bringing that to fruition here. As you can see, it's satiny. It's got this little logo here, but it does have sort of this, it's got a nicer than usual D2 finish, I would say. I've seen it described as a hairline finish. You can kind of, there you go, kind of see that hairline sort of brushed look. But yeah, it's cool, and it's nicely done. Couple points to note here. Everything is very well chamfered around the opening hole, other places around the spine. No sharp edges, kind of on this part of the knife. Obviously very sharp on this side of the knife, and the grind in particular is very well done. I don't know if you can see that, but it's very even on both sides, which I've increasingly found to be important when you're looking at the time and attention that's put into a knife, particularly on the production level. You've got a nice choil there for sharpening that comes out prior or ends before the plunge line, so you don't get that ski jump or anything kind of weird right there, and makes it easy to sharpen. So really, really nicely executed blade by Boker. So appreciate that. The design obviously carried over, and it was executed well there by Boker. I guess technically I should say this is a part of the Boker Plus line, which is why you see that little plus symbol around the word Boker. I think that just means it's...
I don't know.
Special. As I failed that twice, let's move on into action. So this is, as you can see, a front flipper that works a lot better than I just gave it credit for, but a very nice action running on caged ceramic ball bearings. Opens right up authoritatively with that front flicking motion. Now it's also can be opened, I find the thumb a little bit awkward, but you can do that. And those that are, yeah, like I said, it's a little awkward for me on that front, but from a Spidey flick standpoint or middle finger flick, yeah, it's really, really authoritative and easy to do. So that's kind of the way I prefer it. This one, you kind of got to get it in the right spot to be able to kind of fling it forward. But from a front flipper standpoint or that middle finger flick, you can do that very well with this. As I mentioned, running on caged ceramic ball bearings. So a nice open, nice close. And I think as I have this more, it will get smoother and smoother. I will kind of show the detent here because I think it's got a very nice detent. You'll see as you get close. And oh, there it goes. Yep. So no wiggle, none of that, and just a very nicely dialed in detent. So nice job on that. As you can see here, this is a frame lock, stainless steel as it happens. So there's that. It's got a pretty nice lockup here of about 10%, but there's no blade play, no blade rock, none of that silly business, and it locks up securely every time. So action also done very nice. So far between blade and action, I think they've done pretty good justice to the original in terms of sort of the feel. All right, now let's talk about scales and hardware. So scales, as I mentioned, these Contour G10, this is actually, I think, very similar, if not identical, to the original scale that was offered in the original Hunter. It's sort of this bluish, denimish periwinkle, I think is what they call it, G10 with this sort of 3D milling effect in it. Very cool. I like that a lot. I ended up going for when I could finally get one for the carbon fiber on the original, but this one's only being offered in this color and with G10. On the flip side, you've got a stainless steel scale over here, again, as an effort to cut down costs. So there you go. But a couple of points there on the stainless steel. You'll notice the clip, and we are talking about hardware, so we might as well mention the clip in there, right? The clip is virtually identical to that on the titanium milled version. So they bothered to do a titanium or a milling on this stainless steel clip with some of those accent lines and design lines in there. They even cut it down to match this. They could have easily just slapped a standard, regular, old stainless steel clip on here, and they didn't. So I thought that was a nice touch for sure. So that's part of what we got here with the hardware. Another difference, full backspacer on the original. This is using sort of those colonnade standoffs that are there. So, but very, very much a sort of flow-through construction, as you can see. So there you go. You do have a lanyard hole up here, which is fairly discreet, I suppose, because it's in line with these other two screws. But yeah, that's kind of what we got there. Now, Hardware, you've got this HEA logoed pivot here up on the top, and then as I mentioned, countersunk stainless steel hardware. Here's where the gripe that I have comes with this knife. So I don't know if you can see it. Yep, look at that. Yeah, it's stripped basically. And here's what happened. I think sort of three things are going on. So I wanted to take this apart and take a look at it for a couple of reasons. One, just to see it and also to clean it out. But there was also some little extra pieces in there I was kind of intrigued by. I wanted to know how they were, how it was all kind of fitting together. And so I very gently, as I actually am wont to do, tried to get this thing undone. And the reality is sort of three things happened. One, it is Loctited like crazy.
Hey. Don't chop at it. It's not a sword. You're not a sword.
So there's definitely way too much Loctite on here. Two, it's free spinning.
Come on. Right, two.
Oh, that's ugly.
Also a bummer, which doesn't help when things are Loctited. And it doesn't help even further with the fact that this is clearly just very, very soft. I don't know what kind of steel they were using for this pivot, but it is super soft. I was using standard WEHA bits. I was being very gentle. I wasn't over torquing or anything like that. And it almost immediately started stripping right from the beginning. And so I stopped kind of right away. It was literally like a handful of turns. And it was like, oh, geez, not only is it, yeah. So little metal shavings on the end of the bit. I mean, it was just, yeah. So it's a little disappointing and a bummer. And I hope if this continues to be in production with Boker that they address that, because it's, it's not the end of all things, not being able to get this undone. And I'm sure if I put some more effort and work into it, I probably could. But now that it's relatively stripped, it's just, yeah, it's just not going to be an easy process. So unfortunate, to be sure, and kind of a letdown in terms of that particular piece of this knife, which was headed to be a very good, I think, knife and overall, and I still think is, but that's a bummer. So anyways, all right. So we've talked about that. Let's talk about ergos and carry. The ergos, like the original, at least for me, 4-finger grip, very comfortably with this little flare that comes out as part of the design. You might think that that's not going to be comfortable. It actually is exceptionally comfortable because it allows you to pick up that pinky finger, but it also just fits very nicely into the palm of your hand, and there's just really no hot spots. And I know those can be subjective, but on this knife, there really aren't. The clip, the fact that they kept the clip designed the way it is, it just feels really, really nice in hand and is easy to use and carry. So, slides in and out of the pocket very nicely and just is overall a nice compact carry. So, what's the takeaway on this? Well, it's a cool knife based on a cool knife because it's the same design. It's at a much reduced price, which I like. I like the fact that it can get out into more hands, which is really cool. It's got one unfortunate thing, which is that very soft glued very soft steel glued and free spinning pivot that just needs to be addressed if they're going to bother addressing it. But there you go. But otherwise, it's a very competent knife for the money. So that's what we've got here on this Boker Plus HEAdesigns Hunter. I hope you've enjoyed this review. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Maybe consider subscribing to the channel. Always do appreciate that. But more important than any of that, as always, please stay safe out there. Be mild-mannered to one another. And all the best.